Well, look, we think it's an absolute priority. I think Senator Sessions and I are joined in that transportation has got to be a priority. It's good for the economy, it is good for jobs, and good for the competitive position of the United States. Let me go right to that question. I've heard a number of rules of thumb for how many jobs are created for each $1 billion of transportation investment in transportation infrastructure. Do you have a rule of thumb that you apply? Number of jobs created in the United States for every $1 billion of investment?
Let me just say this. You all gave us $48 billion in the economic recovery plan, $48 billion. We spent every penny of that. And what we did, we created 65,000 jobs with 15,000 projects. We started the high-speed rail initiative that the President wanted. We started the Tiger program. We gave $28 billion to roads and bridges, $8 billion to transit. And all the money was spent the way Congress said it should be spent. You haven't read any bad stories about any of the $48 billion that we spent. But what we did, we put 65,000 Americans to work building roads, bridges, transit systems around America. Now, if you use that as a gauge, you know.
How much could you have spent effectively?
A lot more.
Let me just tell you, I argued strenuously for $200 billion. We had done a great deal of due diligence on how much money could be spent, and it wouldn't have ended when it did. We would have actually spread it. Would still be going right now.
Sure.
But we believed that we could have absolutely spent $200 billion more effectively than some of the money was spent. And, you know, we all know that package was put together as the President was coming into office. Actually, a lot of it was put together before he was ever in office. So he was at a distinct disadvantage. But I remember that debate so clearly and the arguments being made that it would take too much time. My argument was, if you tell the states there is this money, and right now, with the economic downturn, there was a lot of contractors available at very favorable rates. Did you find in that $48 billion that you got very good
we got bids below what we anticipated, which gave us additional money. And also jobs done way ahead of schedule also because there was a pent-up demand with contractors and availability of workers and the great partnerships that we have with the states, whether it's the governors or the state DOTs or the commissioners, ready to go. And it worked very well. It really did. And like I said, not one bad story written about any money, any boondoggles, any earmarks, none of that.
Well, I just would join you in saying that I made several speeches, and one of my prime concerns about the bill was that it did not do enough for highways. Our basic bill is about $40 billion a year, so to have $200 billion could have been a transformative act for our infrastructure, but nobody would listen. They moved forward as they did, and but I think you did say that at the time, Mr. Chairman, and I thought you were right.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, as I look back, it's one of the things I regret the most was that I was not able to persuade certain people who had this idea. And I know the economists. I mean, I've heard it 100 times. It takes too long to get infrastructure into the bloodstream. Second question I wanted to ask you about was, do you have any measures for how improved transportation strengthens America's competitive position?
Well, we know now that we are being outcompeted. Your chart shows that by a lot of other countries. China is right now building roadways, airports, runways, high-speed rail, transit systems. I mean, 10 years ago, that would not have been the case. Today it is. We're being outcompeted by lots of other countries. You look what's going to be happening in Brazil with the particularly in Rio, what they're going to be doing there with their infrastructure. And we need to keep pace. We don't keep pace by extending the transportation bill. We keep pace by passing a 5 or 6 year bill, which is a blueprint for what we do to put Americans to work. Build roads, build bridges, build transit systems. And that's what America's always done. Congress has always done that.
I want to go back to my first question because you gave an answer. The thing that's in my head is I've been told many times for every $1 billion of road expenditure, it creates 18 to 20,000 jobs. Is there some rule of thumb like that you apply?
Yeah, you know what, Senator, I'll get that for the record. I'd rather do that than say a figure that may not be accurate.
Okay. Let me go to the next point on my list, which is high-speed rail. You have $47 billion for high-speed rail. What is the status of high-speed rail? Where is it being taken up? What are the prospects? What does that offer us in terms of enhanced competitive position, jobs, economic opportunity? Give us your view of this expenditure of $47 billion.
Well, we start from the premise that anybody that's ever gone to Europe or Asia and ridden the trains over there comes back and said, why don't we have this kind of transportation in America? Because we never had anybody with the vision or the willingness to put the money into it. President Obama stepped up real early in his administration, put $8 billion in the economic recovery plan, which jump-started our opportunity to implement high-speed rail, which, by the way, many of the states were way ahead of the federal government on. California's been working on high-speed rail for 2 decades. We know along the Northeast Corridor, people have been using passenger rail for decades. And so what we did, we took the $8 billion and did like we do with all of our partners. We partnered with groups around the country that have been working on high-speed rail. So we've invested $3.5 billion in California. I just spent a week in California. I met with the governor. He's totally committed. He's on board. I met with stakeholders. I met with people in agriculture. I met with small business people. They have a good plan. In the Midwest, there's a good plan. The governor of Michigan, Governor Snyder, has accepted almost $1 billion for a connection to fix up the tracks between Detroit and Chicago. The governor of Illinois and the governor of Missouri have a very good plan. We've invested more than $2 billion in the Midwest. We just made significant investments in the Northeast Corridor, not just between Washington and New York, but further north in other states that want to get into the high-speed rail business. So the President had a vision. He put the money in the economic recovery. You all gave us some additional money. So totally we've invested over $2 billion. But the important point to make here is there are a number of companies that were building high-speed rail in Europe and Asia, in California, in Illinois, along the Northeast Corridor that want to make investments. I've said all along, there is not enough money in Washington to do all we want to do with high-speed rail. We need private investment, and the private investors are in America. They're in California. They're in Illinois. They're along the Northeast Corridor, making investments, partnering with states in order to make the kind of investments to get this is the next generation of transportation for the next generation. This is what we're doing for our next generation. The last generation left us a state-of-the-art interstate system. Thank goodness they did. Took us 50 years to build it. What we're going to do for the next generation is leave them the next generation of transportation, which is passenger rail.
Well, I personally believe we do need high-speed rail in this country. I've seen what other countries are doing. I've seen what Japan has done. I see what China is doing, and I see what Europe has done. And we can't fall behind in that area either. And, you know, anybody that travels in the Northeast Corridor knows we're way, way behind. Let me just briefly go to the question of funding. You mentioned overseas contingency operations. You know, there's a fair amount of skepticism here with respect to that as a pay-for. And let me try to capture why there's skepticism. There are many of us that believe that while we understand CBO, says this is a savings. We understand that. But here's what troubles me. It just strikes me that what we commit in terms of war funding has very little to do with what we write down in a budget table. What we commit to war funding as a nation is guided by the national security interest of the United States, and it is very unpredictable when you're going to have conflict and what that conflict is going to be and what it's going to cost. And so I understand, that CBO says, if you cap overseas contingency operations because we're drawing down in Iraq and Afghanistan and that registers savings, I understand that. I've always been reluctant to use overseas contingency operations to pay for something. I've always kind of considered, well, that's a bonus in terms of bringing down deficits and debt, but I've always been very reluctant. In fact, in the commission, in the group of 6, we did not use OCO as an offset. What's your position?
My position is this. The last 2 years that I've appeared before Congress, I have taken a heap of criticism for bringing proposals forward that aren't paid for. That's over. The idea that the President didn't want to pay for these things over the last 2 years, we were criticized royally for that by a bunch of people here on this side of the Capitol and a bunch of people on the other side. So the President came up with a pay-for. Debate it. Talk about it. Figure it out. But no more excuses about no pay-fors. We have one. We take the Highway Trust Fund, which is $230 billion, and we take half of the money from the Iraq-Afghanistan Fund, and we pay for what we're talking about here. I'm proud of that. I'm proud the President came up with that. And I'm also very happy that nobody around here can criticize us for not having a pay-for.